The dinner table gleamed under the light of an ornate crystal chandelier, casting shimmering patterns on the polished mahogany surface. The air was thick with the aroma of rich, gourmet dishes, a feast that seemed almost too extravagant to touch. Yet for 8-year-old Liam, it was as if the room itself pressed down on him. He sat stiffly, his small hands folded tightly in his lap, his eyes darting nervously between the adults around the table. His mother, Sarah, sat beside him, her face a mask of politeness, though the faint strain around her eyes betrayed her unease. Sarah had been hesitant to accept the invitation. Ms. Davenport, her boss, and the host of this elaborate dinner, had a reputation for being sharp-tongued and demanding. But when Ms. Davenport had extended the invitation to join her and her elite circle for a special gathering, Sarah had felt obligated. She told herself it was an opportunity to strengthen her position at work, to show she could fit in among the wealthy and influential. For Liam, it was a chance to step into a world he'd only seen in movies, a world of opulence and grandeur. He'd been excited, even giddy, as they walked up the stone path to the grand estate earlier that evening. The excitement, however, had quickly dissolved into discomfort. From the moment they stepped through the massive oak doors, Ms. Davenport's sharp eyes had scanned them like a hawk. Her lips curled in a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She commented on Sarah's dress, a simple but neat outfit, with a backhanded compliment, saying, "It's admirable how you make do with what you have." Liam, in his slightly oversized button-down shirt, felt her gaze linger on him a moment too long, as though she were assessing whether he belonged. Now at the table, Liam sat silently, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. The conversation around him was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, but it felt distant, like a television show he wasn't part of. He focused instead on the breadbasket in front of him, the only familiar comfort in a sea of unrecognizable dishes. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out and took a piece of bread, hoping no one would notice. But someone did. "Excuse me, young man," came Ms. Davenport's voice, sharp and cold. The table fell silent. Liam froze, the bread halfway to his mouth, his cheeks flushing red. "Did I say you could touch that?" she continued, her tone dripping with disdain. Sarah's head snapped up, her face paling. "He's just a child," she began, her voice steady but quiet. Ms. Davenport didn't even look at her. Her eyes were fixed on Liam, who now looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "Children should learn manners," she said curtly. "This isn't some cafeteria." Liam's hand trembled as he put the bread back on the plate, his appetite replaced by a knot of humiliation in his stomach. But Ms. Davenport wasn't finished. "If you can't behave properly at a table like this, then perhaps you shouldn't be here at all," she said, her words cutting like a blade. The silence around the table was deafening. Some of the guests exchanged awkward glances, but no one said anything. Sarah, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, wanted to stand up and leave, to shield her son from this cruelty. But the weight of her circumstances held her in place. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to make an enemy of Miss Davenport. Liam, his face burning with shame, pushed the bread away. His eyes filled with tears, but he refused to let them fall. He had learned early on that showing weakness only made things worse. The room seemed to blur around him as he focused on the white tablecloth, trying to hold himself together. And then a voice broke through the tension. "That's enough," said an older man from the end of the table. His tone was firm but calm, carrying an authority that silenced even Miss Davenport. All eyes turned to him. It was Mr. Gregory Davenport, Miss Davenport's father, a man known for his quiet demeanor and charitable work. He rarely spoke during these gatherings, but when he did, people listened. He stood slowly, his silver hair catching the light as he walked toward Liam. The room seemed to hold its breath. Kneeling beside the boy, he placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Son," he said softly, "don't let anyone make you feel small. You have as much right to be here as anyone else." Liam looked up at him, startled by the kindness in his eyes. Mr. Davenport straightened and turned to face his daughter. "Evelyn," he said, his voice carrying a note of disappointment, "have you forgotten what it means to be human? This boy is a guest in our home. And in this house, we treat our guests with respect." Ms. Davenport's face flushed with anger, but she said nothing. The guests murmured in agreement, emboldened by Mr. Davenport's words. One by one, they began to praise Liam, asking him questions about school and his interests, trying to make him feel welcome. The atmosphere shifted, warmth replacing the earlier chill. Mr. Davenport guided Liam to a seat beside him at the head of the table. "Tonight," he said with a smile, "you're my honored guest." He filled Liam's plate with food and encouraged him to try everything. Slowly, the boy's fear melted away, replaced by a shy smile. For the first time that evening, he felt like he belonged. As the dinner continued, Mr. Davenport shared stories about his own childhood, about the struggles he had faced growing up with very little. "It's not where you come from that defines you," he said, looking directly at Liam. "It's how you treat others and the choices you make along the way." By the end of the night, Liam was laughing and talking freely, his earlier humiliation a distant memory. Miss Davenport, meanwhile, had disappeared from the table, retreating to another room, her pride wounded. No one seemed to miss her. The next morning, Mr. Davenport visited Sarah and Liam at their modest apartment. He apologized for his daughter's behavior and handed Sarah an envelope. Inside was a check large enough to cover Liam's education and a note that simply read, "For a brighter future." Sarah, overcome with emotion, tried to refuse, but Mr. Davenport wouldn't hear of it. "Consider it an investment," he said with a smile. "One day, I believe Liam will do great things. And when that day comes, I hope he'll remember to pay it forward." Years passed, and Mr. Davenport's belief in Liam proved true. The boy who had once been humiliated at a dinner table grew into a confident young man with a passion for cooking. He opened his own restaurant, a cozy place where everyone was treated like family, no matter who they were or where they came from. On the wall of the restaurant hung a plaque with the words, "Kindness costs nothing, but means everything." Liam often told the story of that fateful dinner to his staff, not as a tale of bitterness, but as a reminder of the power of compassion. "You never know how much a small act of kindness can mean to someone," he would say. "It might just change their life." And in his heart, he carried the memory of Mr. Davenport, the man who had shown him what true kindness looked like, the man who had stood up for him when no one else would. Liam's journey was a testament to the fact that even in moments of cruelty, a single act of courage could turn everything around. Years passed, and Liam's once small world expanded far beyond anything he could have imagined. The events of that unforgettable dinner stayed with him, not as a haunting memory, but as a defining moment that shaped his perspective on life, humanity, and his own self-worth. With the help of Mr. Davenport's generosity and guidance, Liam had been able to attend a prestigious culinary school. He threw himself into his studies with a determination born from the deep desire to prove that he was not just the frightened boy at that dinner table. He was capable, worthy, and ready to rise above the scars of that night. Liam didn't just excel in school. He thrived. His natural creativity, combined with the discipline he'd learned from his mother's relentless perseverance, made him stand out among his peers. Professors often remarked on his unique approach to cooking. Liam didn't just prepare meals, he told stories through food. Each dish he created carried a piece of his journey, a reflection of his struggles, and a message of hope. Yet behind his growing confidence was a quiet humility. He had never forgotten the feeling of sitting at a table where he felt he didn't belong. It was during his final year at culinary school that Liam first began to dream about opening a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, but a place where everyone would feel welcomed and valued, no matter their background. He envisioned a warm, inviting space where kindness was served alongside the food, where no one would be judged or turned away. It was an ambitious dream, but one that burned brightly within him. One evening, As Liam was closing up a small cafe where he worked part-time, he received an unexpected visitor. The older man who stepped through the door was none other than Mr. Davenport. Though age had begun to slow his steps, his presence was as commanding as ever. Liam rushed to greet him, his face lighting up with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "I've been following your journey, Liam," Mr. Davenport said, his voice filled with pride. "You've come a long way from that night." Liam nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "It's all because of you, sir. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Mr. Davenport waved a hand dismissively. "You were always capable, Liam. I just gave you a little nudge. But tell me, what's next for you?" Liam hesitated, then shared his dream of opening a restaurant. He described it in detail, his passion shining through as he explained his vision of a place that would be a sanctuary for all, rich or poor, young or old. Mr. Davenport listened intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's a noble dream," he said finally, "and one I think you're more than ready to bring to life. But you'll need help, won't you?" Liam nodded, feeling a mix of hope and doubt. "It's a big undertaking. I've saved what I can, but—" Before he could finish, Mr. Davenport reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Liam, who opened it with trembling hands. It was a deed to a small but charming building in the heart of the city. Attached was a note, "For dreams that matter." Liam looked up, stunned. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "Nonsense," Mr. Davenport said with a smile. "Consider it a continuation of what we started that night. You've proven that you're capable of great things, Liam. Now it's time to share that greatness with the world." With Mr. Davenport's gift and the savings he had carefully built up over the years, Liam set out to transform the modest building into the restaurant of his dreams. He poured every ounce of his creativity, love, and determination into the project. The walls were painted in warm, inviting tones, and the decor was simple yet elegant. Each table bore a small card with an inspiring quote about kindness and resilience, reminders of the values that had brought Liam to this point. The menu was equally thoughtful. Liam crafted dishes that paid homage to his humble beginnings, incorporating ingredients that were both accessible and meaningful. There was a dish named "Bread at the Table," a subtle nod to the moment that had once made him feel unworthy, now reclaimed as a symbol of inclusivity and belonging. He also included recipes inspired by his mother's cooking, a tribute to her unwavering strength and love. When the restaurant, aptly named the Open Table, finally opened its doors, it was an immediate success. People from all walks of life came to dine, drawn not just by the delicious food, but by the unique atmosphere of acceptance and warmth. Liam made it a point to personally greet each guest, ensuring that everyone felt seen and valued. One day, as Liam was making his rounds through the restaurant, he noticed a young boy sitting at a corner table with his mother. The boy's wide eyes and hesitant demeanor reminded Liam of himself all those years ago. He walked over and knelt beside the boy, offering him a gentle smile. "What's your name?" Liam asked. "Ethan," the boy replied softly. "Well, Ethan, I'm glad you're here," Liam said. "Have you tried the bread yet? It's my favorite." Ethan nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. As Liam walked away, he caught the grateful look in the mother's eyes. It was a moment that reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place. The restaurant's reputation continued to grow, and with it, Liam's influence. He began hosting community dinners, inviting people who were struggling to join him for a meal, free of charge. He also partnered with local organizations to provide job training for those in need, offering them positions at the Open Table and a chance to rebuild their lives. As the years went by, Liam's success attracted attention from the media. Reporters flocked to interview him, curious about the man behind the restaurant that was changing lives. Each time, Liam told the same story, the story of the night that had changed his life. He spoke about the humiliation he had felt, the kindness of Mr. Davenport, and the lessons he had carried with him ever since. One evening, as Liam closed up the restaurant after another busy day, he sat at one of the tables, reflecting on his journey. The walls around him were adorned with photographs and mementos, reminders of the countless lives that had been touched by his dream. Yet there was one photo that stood out among the rest. It was a picture of Mr. Davenport, taken during the restaurant's grand opening. The older man had passed away a few years earlier, but his legacy lived on in every meal served, every smile shared, and every life changed at the open table. Liam leaned back in his chair, his heart full of gratitude. He thought about the boy he had once been, sitting at a table where he felt out of place, and the man he had become, creating a table where everyone belonged. He knew that his journey was far from over, but he also knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As he turned off the lights and locked the doors, Liam glanced up at the sign above the entrance. The open table glowed softly in the night, a beacon of hope and kindness in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. Liam smiled to himself, knowing that the best stories were not just told, they were lived, shared, and passed on to others. And so, Liam's story continued, a testament to the transformative power of kindness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring belief that one act of compassion could change the world. The success of the open table continued to ripple outward, its influence spreading beyond the walls of Liam's restaurant. Over the years, the space became more than just a place to eat. It became a community hub, a haven where people came not only to enjoy a meal but to connect, to heal, and to find hope. Liam, now in his mid-30s, had grown into a figure of quiet strength and compassion. His humility remained intact, but there was a new confidence in the way he carried himself, a confidence born from years of hard work, resilience, and the fulfillment of seeing lives changed. One evening, as the restaurant bustled with the sound of laughter and conversation, Liam found himself gazing out at the dining room, his heart swelling with gratitude. The tables were filled with people of all backgrounds, business professionals dining alongside students, families sharing meals with strangers who had quickly become friends. It was exactly what he had envisioned years ago, a space where no one felt judged or out of place. The night was winding down when a young woman approached Liam at the counter. She was carrying a notebook, and her nervous smile suggested she wasn't just there for the food. Liam greeted her warmly, as he did with every guest. "Hi," she said, her voice tinged with hesitancy. "Are you Liam?" "I am," he replied with a kind smile. "How can I help you?" She hesitated, then placed the notebook on the counter and opened it to reveal a series of handwritten letters. "My name's Kara," she said. "I'm a journalist. I've been researching stories about kindness, and, well, your name comes up a lot. I was hoping you'd be willing to share your story with me." Liam leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Stories about kindness, huh? That sounds like something the world could use more of." Kara nodded, her eyes earnest. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. People need to see what's possible when we choose compassion. And your story, it's remarkable. I think it could inspire so many people." Liam's instinct was to shy away from the spotlight. He'd always believed that his work should speak for itself. But there was something about Kara's sincerity that made him reconsider. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said, "but only if we focus on the people who've helped me along the way. This isn't just my story, it's theirs too." Over the next few weeks, Kara visited the open table regularly, sitting with Liam during the quiet hours to listen to his story. He spoke about his childhood, his mother's strength, and the night that had changed everything. He shared the lessons he'd learned from Mr. Davenport and how they had shaped his vision for the restaurant. Kara listened intently, her notebook filling with notes and sketches as she tried to capture the heart of Liam's journey. One evening, as they sat in a quiet corner of the restaurant, Kara asked a question that had been on her mind. "Liam, when you think back to that dinner all those years ago, what do you feel now? Anger? Sadness?" Liam thought for a moment, his gaze distant. For a long time, I felt anger, he admitted. I couldn't understand why someone would go out of their way to make a child feel so small. But over time, that anger faded. Now, when I think about that night, I feel grateful. Kara raised an eyebrow. Grateful? For what? For the lesson it taught me, Liam said. That night showed me the kind of person I never want to be. It also taught me that kindness has the power to change everything. If it weren't for Mr. Davenport standing up for me, who knows where I'd be now? That moment of cruelty was painful, but it led to so much good. And for that, I'm grateful. Kara nodded, her respect for Liam growing with each conversation. She began to see that his story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about transformation, about the way even the darkest moments could be turned into light. As Kara worked on the article, word of her project began to spread. Soon, other people started reaching out to her, sharing stories of how the open table had impacted their lives. There was the single mother who had been given a job in the kitchen after losing her home, the college student who had found mentorship and guidance from Liam, the elderly man who had dined there every week after losing his wife. Finding comfort in the warmth of the community, Kara realized that Liam's story was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of kindness and connection. The article grew into something far greater than she had anticipated, a chronicle of hope that resonated with everyone who read it. When the article was published, it quickly went viral. Titled "The Man Who Built a Table for Everyone," it painted a vivid picture of Liam's journey and the impact of his work. People from around the world reached out, moved by the story of a boy who had once been humiliated at a dinner table and had grown up to create a space where everyone felt valued. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from strangers who wanted to support Liam's mission. Letters arrived daily, filled with words of encouragement and gratitude. Liam read everyone, often moved to tears by the stories people shared. Stories of struggle, resilience, and the power of kindness. But amidst the flood of attention, Liam remained grounded. He continued to focus on his work, expanding the open table to include new initiatives. He started a scholarship program for aspiring chefs from underprivileged backgrounds, ensuring that others would have the same opportunities he had been given. He also launched a mobile kitchen that brought meals to underserved communities, spreading the spirit of the open table far beyond the city. One day, as Liam was overseeing the lunch rush, he noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was an older woman, her once imposing presence now softened by age. She was seated at a table near the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she looked around nervously. It was Miss Davenport. Liam felt a rush of emotions, surprise, curiosity, and a trace of the old pain that he thought he'd left behind. He took a deep breath and walked over to her table, his expression calm but unreadable. "Miss Davenport," he said, his voice steady. "It's been a long time." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of recognition and regret. "Liam," she said softly, I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "What brings you here?" he asked. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I read about you," she said. "About this place, about everything you've done. And I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I need to apologize." Liam listened silently as she spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. She told him about how her actions that night had haunted her over the years, about how she had come to realize the harm she had caused. "I was wrong," she said, tears streaming down her face. "And I am so sorry." For a moment, Liam said nothing. Then he reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means a lot." Ms. Davenport looked at him, her expression one of disbelief and relief. "You're not angry?" she asked. "I was," Liam admitted. "But holding on to anger doesn't change anything. What matters is that we learn from our mistakes and try to do better." As they sat together, talking quietly, the room around them seemed to fade away. It was a moment of reconciliation, of healing, a reminder that it was never too late to choose kindness. When Miss Davenport left that day, Liam watched her go, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. He turned back to the bustling dining room, his heart full. The journey that had begun so many years ago at that fateful dinner had come full circle, and Liam knew that the table he had built, the open table, would continue to grow, touching lives in ways he could only begin to imagine. As Liam watched Ms. Davenport leave the restaurant, her once proud shoulders now softened by humility, he felt a strange but comforting peace settle over him. It wasn't forgiveness alone that had filled the air between them, it was understanding. He realized something profound in that moment. Even those who had caused pain could find their own paths to redemption. It wasn't easy to face the past, and yet Ms. Davenport had done so, carrying with her the weight of her actions and the courage to make amends. Life at the open table continued as it always had, but the encounter left Liam reflective. That night, after the last guest had gone and the lights were dimmed, he sat at one of the tables, staring at the quote cards that adorned each setting. One in particular caught his eye. "Kindness is not a weakness, it is the strength that binds us all." It was something Mr. Davenport had once told him, a lesson that had guided every choice Liam had made since. As the restaurant grew in reputation and scope, Liam found himself presented with opportunities he had never imagined. Invitations flooded in for him to speak at events, to share his story with audiences far and wide. At first, he was hesitant. He had always preferred to stay in the background, letting the work speak for itself. But as more people reached out, students, aspiring chefs, community leaders, asking for advice and inspiration, Liam realized that his voice could be a powerful tool for change. His first speaking engagement was at a small community college. Standing before a modest crowd of students, Liam felt a familiar wave of nerves wash over him. Public speaking wasn't his strength, but as he looked out at the eager faces, he remembered why he was there. He started with a story, not the polished version that had appeared in articles or interviews, but the raw, unfiltered account of a boy sitting at a table where he felt unworthy. He spoke about the pain of that moment, about the humiliation that had burned so deeply it left scars he carried for years. But he didn't linger on the darkness. Instead, he focused on the light, the kindness of Mr. Davenport, the resilience his mother had shown, and the countless small acts of generosity that had lifted him along the way. "It's not the pain that defines us," he said, his voice steady. "It's how we choose to respond to it." The audience erupted into applause, and as Liam stepped off the stage, students crowded around him, eager to share their own stories. Some spoke of struggles with self-doubt, others of dreams they were afraid to chase. Liam listened to each one, offering encouragement and advice, his humility disarming even the most hesitant. Word of his talks spread quickly, and soon Liam found himself addressing larger audiences, corporations, schools, even international conferences. Each time, he tailored his message to the crowd, weaving in stories of resilience, compassion, and the transformative power of kindness. Yet, no matter how far his words traveled, Liam remained grounded in the mission of the open table. The restaurant was his heart, and every success he achieved felt like a tribute to the community it had created. One evening, after returning from a speaking engagement in another city, Liam walked into the open table to find it buzzing with activity. It wasn't unusual for the restaurant to be busy, but something felt different. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by a round of applause. His staff and regular patrons had gathered to surprise him with a celebration, a thank you for everything he had done to enrich their lives. Among the crowd was Kara, the journalist who had written the article that had propelled the open table into the spotlight. She approached Liam with a knowing smile, holding the camera in her hands. "You're going to want to capture this moment," she said, gesturing toward the far corner of the room. Liam followed her gaze and saw a group of people standing together, their faces a mix of joy and gratitude. As he approached, he recognized many of them. The single mother who had found a job in his kitchen, the elderly man who had rediscovered a sense of purpose through the community dinners, the college student who had been mentored by Liam. And standing in the center of the group, holding a small, well-worn book, was Ethan, the boy Liam had met years ago, sitting at a corner table with his mother. Ethan was older now, his once shy demeanor replaced by a quiet confidence. He held out the book to Liam, his hands trembling slightly. "I wanted to give you this," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "It's a collection of stories, my story, and the stories of so many others who've been touched by what you've created here." Liam took the book, his heart swelling as he flipped through its pages. Each story was handwritten, accompanied by photos and drawings. There were stories of people who had found hope in the darkest times, of lives rebuilt and dreams rekindled. Some of the pages bore the signatures of strangers from faraway places, people Liam had never met, but who had been inspired by his work. "I thought you should know," Ethan continued, "just how far your kindness has traveled." Liam looked up, his eyes glistening with tears. He reached out and pulled Ethan into a hug, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. "This means more than you could ever know." The celebration that followed was a testament to the impact Liam had made, not just in the lives of those present, but in the countless ripples that had spread from every meal served, every word spoken, and every act of compassion. As the night wore on, Liam found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, not just the milestones, but the quiet, unspoken moments of struggle and growth that had shaped him into the man he had become. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, Liam sat in the restaurant, the book of stories resting on the table before him. He opened it to a random page and began to read, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude for the community he had built. Each story was a reminder that kindness was not a fleeting gesture but a force that could create lasting change. In the weeks that followed, Liam began to think about the future of the open table. He knew that the work he had started could not remain confined to a single location. There were communities all over the world that could benefit from the values the restaurant embodied. With the help of his staff and supporters, he began to explore ways to expand the concept, creating partnerships with local organizations, training programs for aspiring chefs, and even a network of open-table pop-up kitchens that could travel to areas in need. But Liam's vision didn't stop there. He wanted to ensure that the lessons of compassion and resilience reached future generations. With the funds raised from his speaking engagements and the donations from supporters, he established the Open Table Foundation, dedicated to providing resources for education, community building, and initiatives that promoted kindness and inclusivity. Through it all, Liam remained the same humble man who had once doubted his place at a dinner table. He continued to greet guests with warmth, to listen to their stories, and to remind them that they were valued. And as the years went by, the legacy of the open table grew, touching lives in ways Liam could never have imagined. One day, as Liam stood outside the restaurant, watching the steady stream of guests coming and going, he thought about the boy he had once been. He thought about the humiliation he had felt, the kindness that had lifted him, and the journey that had followed. And he realized that while his story had begun at a single table, its ending was limitless. Because kindness, he knew, was not just a moment, it was a movement, and it was one he would carry forward for the rest of his life. Liam stood outside the open table, the warm glow of the sign reflecting off the glass windows. The hum of conversation and laughter from inside carried into the quiet evening, a symphony of voices that spoke of lives intersecting, stories shared, and burdens eased. The restaurant had become more than he ever dreamed it could be. Yet, Liam's thoughts lingered on what came next. He had built a sanctuary for his community, but the world was vast, filled with countless others who needed a place like this, a table where they felt they belonged. One day, as Liam was going through the usual routines of running the restaurant, a letter arrived. It was addressed to him in neat handwriting, bearing a return address from a small town several hours away. Curious, He opened it and began to read. The letter was from a young woman named Maria, who had read about the open table and was inspired by its mission. She wrote of her own struggles growing up in a rural area where opportunities were scarce and community support even scarcer. Maria had recently inherited her grandmother's cafe, a once thriving hub in their town that had fallen into disrepair. She wanted to revive it, not just as a business, but as a place where people could come together, much like Liam's restaurant. However, she lacked the resources and guidance to make her vision a reality. Her letter ended with a simple plea. If you believe in the power of kindness the way I do, please help me bring that light to my community. The letter stayed with Liam long after he finished reading it. He had received many similar messages over the years, but something about Maria's words resonated deeply. Perhaps it was her determination, or the echoes of his own struggles in her story. Either way, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The next morning, Liam called a meeting with his staff. They gathered in the dining room, the tables pushed aside to make space. Liam stood at the center, holding Maria's letter. I want to share something with you, he began, reading the letter aloud. As he spoke, he saw the same spark of inspiration in his team's eyes that he had felt while reading it. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before one of his chefs spoke up. We've built something incredible here, she said. Why not share it with others? Another staff member nodded. If Maria's community needs this, let's help her make it happen. Encouraged by their support, Liam reached out to Maria. They spoke over the phone for hours, discussing her vision for the cafe and the challenges she faced. Liam offered to visit her town and see the space for himself. Maria's voice trembled with gratitude as she accepted. A week later, Liam arrived in Maria's town. It was a quiet place, surrounded by rolling hills and farmland. The cafe was nestled at the heart of the town, its faded sign and boarded-up windows telling a story of neglect but also potential. Maria met him at the door, a young woman with a determined smile and a spark of hope in her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I wasn't sure you'd respond. How could I not? Liam replied. This place reminds me of where I started. They spent the day walking through the cafe, envisioning what it could become. Maria shared her ideas, adding a communal garden out back, hosting workshops for local artisans, and creating a pay-what-you-can menu to ensure everyone could enjoy a meal. Liam offered advice, drawing from his own experiences, and together they began to outline a plan. Over the following months, Liam and his team worked closely with Maria and the townspeople to transform the cafe. It was a labor of love, with volunteers from the community pitching in to clean, paint, and rebuild. Local farmers donated fresh produce, artisans offered handmade decor, and a retired carpenter restored the old wooden tables to their former glory. Liam visited frequently, not just to oversee the project, but to connect with the people whose lives would be touched by it. He hosted cooking classes for aspiring chefs in the town, sharing his knowledge and encouraging them to bring their own creativity to the table. Slowly, the cafe began to take shape, becoming a reflection of Maria's vision and the community's spirit. When the cafe, renamed The Gathering Place, finally opened its doors, it was met with an outpouring of support. Families, farmers, students, and elders filled the space, their laughter and conversation weaving together like the threads of a tapestry. Maria stood at the counter, beaming with pride as she welcomed each guest personally. Liam watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. This was exactly what he had hoped to achieve, not just one table, but many, spreading kindness and connection wherever they were needed. News of the gathering place spread quickly, and soon other communities began reaching out to Liam. They wanted to create their own versions of the open table, adapting its principles to meet the unique needs of their towns and cities. Liam realized that what had started as a single restaurant had the potential to become a movement, a network of spaces dedicated to kindness, inclusivity, and community. To support this growing demand, Liam and his team established the Kindness Collective, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping communities create their own gathering places. The collective provided resources, training, and mentorship, ensuring that each project was sustainable and tailored to the community it served. Liam's vision expanded beyond physical spaces. The collective also launched programs in schools, teaching children the values of empathy, resilience, and collaboration. As the movement grew, Liam found himself traveling more than ever, visiting towns and cities across the country and beyond. Each new gathering place was a testament to the power of connection, a reminder that no matter how different people's circumstances might be, the need for belonging was universal. Yet, despite the growing scope of his work, Liam never lost sight of his roots. He continued to spend time at the open table, greeting guests and listening to their stories. The restaurant remained his sanctuary, the place where it had all begun. Liam's work, once rooted in a single act of kindness, had grown into a global movement. Yet even as the Kindness Collective expanded, Liam remained steadfast in his belief that the heart of his mission was not in scale but in depth. It wasn't about how many tables he helped create. It was about the lives changed at each one. Every story mattered. Every connection was significant, and every moment of kindness had the potential to ripple outward in ways he couldn't always see. One winter morning, Liam received an invitation that took him by surprise. It came from a prestigious university in New York, inviting him to deliver the keynote address at their annual Social Impact Conference. The theme was Building Bridges Through Compassion. Though Liam was no stranger to public speaking by now, this invitation felt different. The conference was renowned for hosting some of the world's most influential leaders and thinkers. For a boy who had once felt invisible at a dinner table, the idea of standing on such a stage was almost surreal. After some thought, Liam accepted. Over the following weeks, he worked tirelessly on his speech, reflecting on the lessons he had learned and the stories he wanted to share. He wanted to convey not just the importance of kindness, but the urgency of it in a world that often seemed fractured and divided. When the day of the conference arrived, Liam stood backstage, his notes in hand. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation, every seat filled. He took a deep breath, centering himself as his name was announced. The applause that greeted him as he stepped onto the stage was thunderous, but Liam's focus was on the faces in the crowd. He saw curiosity, hope, and perhaps a little skepticism. It was these faces he spoke to as he began. "I want to start with a story," Liam said, his voice steady but warm. Not about success, or accolades, or movements, but about an 8-year-old boy sitting at a table where he didn't feel he belonged. He recounted the story of that fateful dinner, the humiliation, the tears, and the unexpected act of kindness that had changed his life. As he spoke, the room grew silent, the weight of his words settling over the audience. He didn't shy away from the pain of that moment, but he also didn't dwell on it. Instead, he focused on what came after, the resilience it sparked, the opportunities it led to, and the community it inspired. Kindness, Liam continued, isn't always easy. It's not always grand gestures or sweeping movements. Sometimes it's as simple as standing up for someone, as Mr. Davenport did for me. Sometimes it's creating a space where people feel seen and valued. And sometimes it's just listening, really listening, to the stories of those around you. He went on to share stories from the open table and the many gathering places that had sprung up in its wake. He spoke of Maria's Cafe, of Ethan's book, of the people who had found hope and purpose through a simple meal. Each story illustrated a different facet of kindness, its power to heal, to connect, and to transform. When Liam finished, the audience rose to their feet, the applause echoing through the auditorium. But it wasn't the applause that stayed with him. It was the conversations that followed. Throughout the day, attendees approached him, eager to share their own stories of kindness and connection. Some were small, quiet acts, while others were life-changing. Each one reminded Liam of the infinite potential of compassion. Among those who approached him was a young woman named Priya, a social entrepreneur from India. She had been working to bring sustainable farming practices to rural villages, but struggled with community mistrust and division. Inspired by Liam's talk, she shared her dream of creating a communal dining space where farmers and families could come together, not just to eat but to rebuild trust and cooperation. Liam listened intently, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I think you're onto something," he said. "Food has a way of breaking down barriers. If you're willing to take the first step, I'll help you however I can." Priya's idea marked the beginning of another collaboration for the Kindness Collective. Over the next year, Liam worked closely with Priya and her team to design and launch the Harvest Table, a community space in the heart of a rural farming district. The project combined sustainable agriculture with shared meals, creating a model that not only improved livelihoods but also fostered unity. The success of the Harvest Table led to similar projects in other countries, each one tailored to the unique needs of its community. In Brazil, a cafe in a favela became a safe haven for children and teens. In Kenya, a mobile kitchen brought meals and medical care to remote villages. In Iceland, a cozy dining hall became a gathering place for immigrants and locals to share stories and traditions. Through it all, Liam remained deeply involved, traveling to each site, mentoring local leaders, and learning from their experiences. He often said that he gained as much as he gave, each project teaching him something new about resilience, creativity, and the universal language of kindness. Back home, the Open Table continued to thrive, its walls now adorned with photos and mementos from the growing network of gathering places. Ethan, who had become a full-time writer and advocate for the collective, often joked that the restaurant felt like a museum of kindness. Liam would laugh, but he knew there was truth in it. Every photo, every story, was a reminder of what was possible when people chose compassion over indifference. One evening, as Liam was closing up the restaurant, he received an unexpected visit. It was Sarah, his mother, now in her 60s, but as strong and determined as ever. She had come to see him after hearing about his latest project. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've built something incredible, something I could have never imagined." Liam smiled, taking her hand. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You showed me what it means to keep going, no matter how hard it gets." They sat together in the quiet restaurant, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. For Liam, it was a full-circle moment, a chance to honor the woman who had been his first source of strength and inspiration. As the years went on, Liam began to think about his legacy, not in terms of accolades or achievements, but in the lives he had touched and the seeds he had planted. He knew he wouldn't always be able to lead the collective, but he was confident that the movement would continue without him. He had built it to last, empowering others to take up the mantle of kindness in their own ways. One day, as he sat at a table in the Open Table, surrounded by laughter and the clinking of dishes, Liam felt a deep sense of peace. The boy who had once been humiliated at a dinner table had created a world where no one else would feel that way. His journey had been long, filled with challenges and triumphs, but it had been worth every step. Liam looked around, his gaze falling on a young boy sitting with his family in the corner. The boy was laughing, his face lit with joy, and Liam couldn't help but smile. He saw himself in that boy, not as he had been that fateful night, but as he was now, confident, loved, and unshakably certain of his place at the table. And in that moment, Liam knew his work would live on, carried forward by the countless lives he had touched and the infinite kindness he had inspired.